Okay, let's make a start. This week we're looking at market testing. Obviously you don't have to do this as part of your report, so really all the content for your report is finished. I hope that's going along well. Angela and the team tell me that it is going along well. Some questions in relation to the ATAR model. She was asking, said that you were asking about, you have to do the ATAR model for the first 12 months. Yes, you can do it in a spreadsheet. You can do it over 3, 4, 5 years. If you want to, you can do it that way. You've been asked to do it for 1 year. So that is the focus of doing the ATAR. The primary thing in doing your ATAR is that you'll have your trial level and your repeat level that you will get out of your research. Your availability and your awareness are going to be a function of your launch plan. Okay, they're going to be based on assumptions that you're making. What your tutor is going to be looking for when they're marking your group report is the justification for the numbers that you put into your ATAR model reflect what you are doing as part of your strategies and tactics in your launch plan. So, by example, if you do not have experience in a category that you are launching into, and therefore you are dealing with new distribution channels where you don't have pre-existing relationships, if you are not doing extensive trade promotions in order to encourage retailers to stock your product, and you're not being descriptive in what they are, then you cannot expect to get a high level of distribution. If you are, then you can. Yeah, there's certainly a greater degree, but you will still be expected to discuss how you are going to encourage your distributors to carry your products. What kind of incentives are you going to offer? Take an average.
Are there exceptions to that? So, for example, with apps, because they automatically go on the App Store and everyone has access to that, can you assume that availability is the amount of people who use those platforms and those apps?
You would have to assume that availability in that instance would be based on the accessibility to your app. If they were buying it through the...
Yes, technically if it's only on Apple, then everyone who has iOS and an Apple smartphone
Yep.
is available.
It has access to it.
That assumption that you're technically not in the market just because the access to customers and their availability is so easy.
Yes, is the short answer to that question. And then the same is true for obviously awareness, right? So awareness is all linked to your promotional activity that you're planning to do. And those that do more extensive promotional activity against trying to attract new users to the brand, those that do perhaps extensive activity designed to increase consumption amongst existing users that might be within the current brand franchise, you need to explain what they are, and you need to be quite descriptive in how you build that section out, because that has to have a correlation and a relationship to your final ATAR model. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. And then the maths behind the ATAR model is really something that can be done in year 4, not even high school, right? It's pretty basic. So the maths itself is very simple. You just have to make sure that the assumptions that you are making are logical and reason on 2 of the parameters for which you have to make assumptions. The other 2 will come out of your research. Did you have your hand up? No. Okay, so good question. We don't have access to all information. One of the things that is important for you to get used to is in new product development, you are constantly making assumptions. But to answer your question, which is a good question, and the question was, in practice, how might we strengthen up our understanding? I'll talk about how in practice we do it for both the two issues that are missing, so awareness and availability. Availability, as you know, is just distribution, another word for distribution. It just makes the model sound better as ATAR rather than okay. So in practice, for awareness, what we would do is we'd go to our media agency and we would ask our media agency, or we would tell our media agency that we have X amount of dollars to spend on advertising. Can you please tell me, for that kind of money, what kind of reach and frequency might we expect to get amongst our target audience? And they would be able to then tell you, based on those analysis, what kind of awareness level you might expect to get amongst your target audience. So they would tell you, based on how much you're telling them you have available to invest in advertising and promotion behind the brand. For distribution, it varies across category, as you've indicated, but if you are typically in an environment where you are selling white goods, brown goods, cars, whether you are selling, actually probably to a lesser extent cars, because you're going to buy them through a dealership, but certainly FMCG, your sales team will have an existing relationship, you hope, with the buyers that sit within those particular stores. But if you're an FMCG, for example, and you are suddenly launching a product out of traditional FMCG markets, and you've got relationships with Coles and Woolworths, Aldi, etc., then in that environment, you're going to get a pretty good indication. Okay? You'll probably also have history on availability. Okay? You'll have a history on how responsive organisations have been in accepting your product as a distribution lane. So your sales team will go out in advance, take the product to the buyers, and ask those buyers if they will carry the line, give the line a try. And as part of that process, you'll be telling them, how the product is different from the competition. You'll be telling them what the potential sales opportunity is for the brand. You'll be telling them what kind of margin they can make on your product. You'll be telling them the strategies you're deploying to actually grow the category. And hopefully they'll turn around and charge you a fee, and they will list your product and tell you that you have to engage in certain trading terms and promote the brand in order for them to carry it. So relatively simple. But if I'm selling ice cream for Nestle and I suddenly decide that I'm going to start selling coffee machines, or let's say coffee, I'm selling freeze-dried coffee, and I suddenly go, no longer am I going to be selling freeze-dried coffee.
I'm sorry, I left my...
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. That's all right. I was going to see if you could give them a lesson in, it looked like geography. Geology. So you know, no good.
My apologies. Sorry, everyone.
It did look quite interesting, though.
It's fun.
Yeah.
See ya.
So, yeah. If, by example, you do not have, if, by example, Nestle moves out of coffee and starts selling coffee machines through Bing Lee and through Harvey Norman, their buyers are not going to have those relationships because they're not familiar with those channels of distribution. So in that instance, you might expect that, that distribution might initially be a little bit slower. It also depends on the size of the organisation. So there's still assumptions that you bring in, but that's effectively how it would work in practice. Your sales team would be out there and they'd be able to report back to you on which of the retailers were going to take your brand and at what status level your product was going to be distributed at. Because even if you distribute through Woolworths, they'll give you a different category level of distribution, of which there are 5. Okay, so At category 1, you get 100% distribution. Category 2, I think it drops down to about 70% distribution, and then it keeps dropping down all the way down. Brands normally start up high, and then they dwindle until they get deleted out of all stores. So that's that part. Okay. So everyone happy with how their project's going? Any more questions? No? Okay. So the section that we're moving on to now is looking at market testing. It's based on the premise that prior, we've done our product use testing. Okay, so we've done our concept testing. We've done our product use testing, which is getting consumers familiar with our product prototype. There is still another stage of research that we can potentially do, and it's what we refer to as market testing. The idea behind market testing is to try and get an estimate of, or further confirmation of the brand's potential commercial success. Okay? It's just another round of research as we're getting closer to a potential launch. That's pretty much just restating what I have said. Now, there are basically three major tests that we've explored. As I said, concept testing, product use testing, and market testing. And market testing, concept testing checks, is really there to check that there's not a lack of need. Product use testing is there to check that the product doesn't actually meet the need, and it's not, in fact, if it's not meeting the need, there's a problem. And market testing is really sort of evaluating the marketing effort behind the product in order to reach its broader objectives. So there are two reasons for market testing. That should say two, only says one, don't know why. Market testing is an opportunity to obtain solid forecasts of dollar and unit sales, and it also can provide diagnostic information to help refine the launch plan. And at this point we can get further information pertaining to the way the product performs, its packaging, its positioning, its advertising execution, mediums that are used to deliver the advertising message, its price, etc. So it gives us a more, basically, just further research in order to give us more confidence as we move forward. Should we market test? So are there any special twists on the launch? So did the Product Innovations Charter dictate a tight launch timetable, which might prohibit us from proceeding to a market launch? You might not have time to do market launch testing. Does the PIC limit launch funds, meaning it should be rolled out? Is the firm trying to gain category experience to mitigate risks of an immediate full market rollout? What information is still needed? Do we want to further tighten sales forecasting as part of a test market? Do we need time to ramp up volume to full-scale productions? This is a common one, actually. It's a one that can be somewhat problematic if you don't have enough stock, as I think I've mentioned before. Another really important one is, what is the likely effect of cannibalisation? In some instances, you might want to have a bit of an understanding of to what extent is your new product going to potentially cannibalise or just steal share away from your existing product, rather than actually either A, grow the market, or steal share away from your competitor. And to what extent will the new product sales volume come from other products already in the market? And obviously this is a preferred option. We're wanting to migrate customers that are using competitive products into replacing those products with our own. What are the costs? So market test costs include direct costs of the test, which are basically fees to a market researcher to conduct it, and the costs of the launch itself, so production of product, advertising, etc. And in some instances, the costs of doing this are so expensive that they actually do in fact preclude market testing. And an example of that would be car companies just won't just test a car in one state. There's no point. They might as well just launch nationally straight away. Secondly, what is the nature of the marketplace? So to what extent are competitors likely to react to our launch? There may be an immediate demand, which means we need to get the product to the market quickly. Pharmaceutical drugs is a good example of that. Is there access to market test methodologies? One really good way of doing market testing is, as we'll see unfold, you can get access to scan data. You can do like mini test markets where you can get access to different scan data that will give you greater detailed information. But in some instances, you can't do that. So, what are the methods of market testing? Well, in fact, there are 3 methods of market testing. The first method is referred to as the pseudo sale. The second is referred to as the controlled sale. And the third is what we refer to as the full sale. Okay? Be nice and simple if it was that simple. But within each of these, there are different variations. Okay? So let's look firstly at the pseudo sale. So this approach asks buyers to do something. Effectively, it asks them to say that they would buy the product if it were available, and then pick the item off the shelf of a make-believe store. So much of the marketing strategy utilised in the presentation of the product to buyers. So basically what we mean here is that the person conducting the research is actually presenting the marketing strategy to the potential customer. However, for the buyer in this situation, there's no risk because they effectively don't have to buy the product or service. So there are 2 approaches. One is referred to as the speculative sale method, and the second is the simulated test market. So the first asks them if they would buy it without the need to hand over any money. And the second is a simulated test market, which creates a false buying situation, and observers observe what customers actually do. So how does the speculative sale method differ to the technique that is used in concept testing? Well, in the concept test, we give the new item's positioning and how something about the product's form. Then we ask how likely would you be to buy a product like this if we made it. And in the product use test, we give consumers some product, we have them use it, and we ask them the same question. But in the pseudo sale method, called the speculative sale method, we go to the customer, we give them a full pitch, including answering any questions they might have. We will be happy to negotiate on price. We'll show them our advertising and ask if we make the product as described, would you effectively buy it? So it's a speculative approach to seeing whether there is consumer interest in consumption behaviour. So where does the speculative method actually fit? Where industrial firms have very close downstream relationships with key buyers, where new product work is technical, entrenched with the firm's expertise, and only little reaction is needed from the marketplace, where the adventure has very little risk, and where the item is new, say a new material or a completely new product type, and key diagnostics are needed. For example, what set of alternatives does the potential buyer see, or what possible applications for the product come to mind? So, in the simulated test market, we create a false buying situation and we observe what customers do. So the typical procedure is this. Respondents are approached in a some of you may have had this done to you. It's actually quite annoying when it does because it's quite time consuming. But effectively what happens is you get a market researcher will approach you in a shopping mall and they'll ask you to step inside what is usually an empty store. They'll give you a questionnaire relating to attitudes, your attitudes around the product category that they are doing research on. You are then, as a consumer, exposed to the advertising. You're often shown several ads that might be part of a campaign, along with other ads from other competitors in the category, so you don't actually know which of the products is being tested. You are then, as a customer, taken into another shop, effectively, which is set out as a fictitious convenience store that contains shelves of product. They're given typically either real money or play money. And the idea is that having seen the advertising, they go and actually buy your product. That's the whole premise upon which it is built. And then once they buy either your product or the competitor's product, they're given a post-purchase questionnaire on their attitudes, their planned product usage, and why they did or why they didn't purchase your specific product. So this is what we refer to as the simulated test market. What are its drawbacks? Doing the calculations can be mathematically complex, but the biggest one is it's actually a fictitious buying environment, so it's set up as an experiment. So it's not a real store, so it is a false condition. There could be, or there is the possibility of faulty assumptions around the data, such as the number of stores that will actually make the product available. May not be applicable to totally new to the market products, since there might be no prior data available to compare any results to. And it does not test the channel members' response to the new product, only the final consumer. So what it means by that is we're not actually testing the response of our distributors. So it's only, this test is only done amongst consumers. The second is the controlled sale. In the controlled sale, we move from a laboratory condition to a controlled condition. So we go to a real competitive environment where the buyer must make a real purchase. So the method is still research, largely because the new product has not yet been released for sale on a full commercial basis. So the controlled sale is more, I should say, rigorous than the pseudo sale. However, it tends to be much more revealing. And the controlled sale method has 3 different variations to it. It has informal selling, direct marketing, and mini markets. So informal selling is used in business-to-business markets, or where consumer products are sold directly to end users. And here, the salespeople call on firms to meet representatives of firms at, say, trade shows and ask them to purchase as a real cash sale. So often they go there to a particular trade show in order to test the capacity for themselves to sell their product, either to consumers or to other distributors. So we don't ask them if they would buy, we ask them to buy. And if all goes well, those sales should move into repeat sales, and then the sales calls can be expanded to capture more customers. So it is a test market that you actually start in a very informal way before you move into more formal distribution and more formal active selling of your product. So that's why it's B2B. So you've got a representative from the firm selling to other organisations, or you have a product sold that is directly to an end user. Direct marketing is pretty straightforward. You should be all familiar with what direct marketing is. This is where we're selling via mail, via phone, TV or computer. And the idea is to test the sales potential via a direct mechanism to consumers, that is, without a retailer. It allows for secrecy, quick feedback, low cost, ease of testing, multiple variations. So it might well be that this isn't, you don't intend to always use direct marketing to sell your product. This is just a method that you're using to do the test through. And finally, we have mini markets. And this involves using a selected, limited number of outlets where the product can be sold. These are by no means a representative sample. They are more likely to be bigger outlets where cooperation can be obtained. So instead of using a whole city, as is the case in test marketing, we use each store as a mini market. And an example of that would be if Black & Decker made contact with Bunnings and asked them to specifically range their new drill. Okay, so they're testing with one key distributor. There would be limited support, perhaps, by example, some trade incentive, but no advertising, typically. So the product is put in to the distribution channel, you're getting it, and it's being really sold, so it's finished stock, it is ultimately being sold as real product, and consumers are physically buying the product. And finally, there is a full sale, and in a full sale, the firm has decided to fully market the product. However, it wants to do so on a limited basis first to check the product and the marketing plan are correct before it moves to a full national rollout. And the product is sold in one or more test market cities, and it's usually sold via regular distribution channels and advertising and local media. So in Australia, in practice, a really good place to do the full sale market test is Newcastle. Okay. Why Newcastle? A lot of firms use Newcastle. Its population is representative of the entire population of our country. That's one reason. Secondly, you can selectively buy media just in those markets. So you can buy just television, just radio, just outdoor, just print in that Newcastle market. So you're not wasting money on having to have your advertising go to all other states. You can selectively buy it in that market. And most of the distributors are in those marketplaces. So if you're selling a product through a Bing Lee, Harvey Norman, JB Hi-Fi, they're all in Newcastle. If you're selling a product through Coles, Woolworths, Aldi, they're all in Newcastle. Okay? So you do your test, you do your full sale test there with your standard level of advertising that you would do. And if it is successful, it's a very good indicator of your capacity to then roll out to the Sydney market, then the Eastern Seaboard, then to the Western states. Okay. Very common and done a lot in practice. Okay. A lot of FMCG companies use this method as a mechanism to make sure that the advantage of this is really that you haven't gone and spent all that money advertising nationally, paid all those listing fees to have your product ranged nationally. You've done it in a very select market. You haven't made your factory build stock that you might have to help clear out if the product doesn't sell. But this gives you really good confidence, strong confidence level, because of the representation of the Newcastle market relative to the population. If you get X% market penetration in one market after a certain amount of time, you can expect to get it nationally. That's the idea. What's the downside? What's one of the risks? What's one of the problems of doing this? Yeah, exactly. So within 5 minutes of that going on a shelf, a sales rep will have it back in the marketing head office, and the marketer will know, the other competing firm will know that this is about to hit the market. They'll be buying the scan data to see how it's selling, and it allows them the opportunity to develop something perhaps quickly in order to get to market, to block the effectiveness of this potential brand as it goes from full sale to a full rollout. The text gives a bit of a layout as to the types of testing that are, I guess, appropriate for different industrial or consumer-based markets, whether it's goods or services, packages, durables or services. So the real idea here being that you have the pseudo sale, the controlled sale, and the full sale, and basically how you might go about executing those. So the pros and cons of test marketing: advantages, risk reduction. So it lessens your monetary risk, your channel relationships. It doesn't upset, you don't upset your distributors by putting in a product that is crappy and they get stuck with it. Then they come and ask you to help clear it out because they don't want it. Sales force morale. Really, it's often something that you wouldn't appreciate yet unless you work in a sales team. But if your company launches a new product and it doesn't sell, it's extremely demoralising as a sales rep. A lot of you who might decide to go into marketing and want to start your careers in FMCG firms, for example, will often start as sales reps. I did. I spent 12 months on the road. I had the eastern suburbs, and I had a territory in western New South Wales. So I had 3 weeks in Sydney and 1 week interstate. And when I first got the job, I went, oh my God, I want to go in marketing. What am I doing in sales? It's terrible. You actually learn a lot, and it really builds your understanding of the way your products should be not only marketed, but importantly sold. And it gives you really good insight. So, and normally what happens, they leave you there for 12 months and then they bring you back into the marketing team. So sales force morale is really important because you want people, if you're selling a product, you want your sale to be easy, you don't want it to be difficult. It doesn't create good job satisfaction where you're going and trying to sell the products. It can help you make improvements to your marketing mix. So it might well be that your advertising message was not effective enough in demonstrating the brand's differentiation or the product's differentiation. It might well be that you might need to increase the weight because you might not be getting the awareness level that you were looking for. They might not be connecting with your brand association, so you might need more repetition of your message, so you might need what we refer to as more frequency. It might mean that you need to make adjustments to your production facilities. You might actually end up selling more than you anticipated, and therefore you need to put that anticipation into production planning in order to make sure that you don't have out-of-stocks, because out-of-stocks are costly. They create opportunity for your newly recruited customers to shift back to their original brand or to divorce themselves from the category. Disadvantages: it can be very costly to do some of this kind of testing. They can take up to 9 to 12 months to do. As we mentioned, it can hurt your competitive advantage because they can monitor what's happening, particularly in FMCG, very easy to buy scan data. And your competitor may try and beat you to the punch with a product and go national, because if they can see that your product is actually selling, they might get a jump on you in the other markets. So it is a balanced strategy. Then we have the rollout, where we select a limited area of the country, one or several cities or states, and monitor sales of the product there. Starting areas are not necessarily representative. The company may be able to get the ball rolling more easily in one particular market, and it may deliberately choose a hard area to sell in, to learn what the pitfalls might be. The idea being when we actually switch to the full national launch and take our product nationally. Types of rollout, you can have rollouts by geography, rollouts by channel, rollouts by application or use, and rollouts by retailers that have less influence to most influence. So you can really, it's really up. The three obvious ones are geography, so you can go to different markets, different geographical places, different channels. So channels means you might sell your product through duty-free stores first. You might sell through boutiques. You might sell through mass market. You can make a choice about, strategic choice about which particular market you want to move through. And then certainly by specific retailers that reside in those channels, you can pick specific retailers. So that is market testing. The second part of the lecture is looking at launch management. Any questions on market testing? Yeah, it's an omission on my behalf. Next year it will be in there. But I didn't ask you to do it as part of your brief, so you don't need to include it. No. Okay. Yeah, so basically, I thought you had enough work to do without sort of adding in another one. Okay. You will need to know the primary focus on the launch plan, as I mentioned earlier, was really what are you going to do to make this launch successful? That's the real focus of it. And then the second part is really linking those activities that you plan to do to your ATAR model to make sure there's a connection. And I guess, I'm expecting in your report you'll write more than say, oh, we're going to do advertising. That, if you write that, that's a fail, right? In that sense. I want to know what kind of advertising, to whom, perhaps dramatising what attribute or benefit that you think is important as part of your launch campaign. What kind of media channels are you going to be using? Are you going to be trying to engage customers in facilitating brand conversation, or are you going to be trying to get them to invite friends into your brand front? You tell me what you're doing. You're in marketing, right? Are you going to have your brand printed on the back of a coaster in a pub? You don't have to give me an ad. I'm not asking you for an ad, but I am asking of you to be behaving like marketers and telling me the types of things that you're going to do. So just don't go, we're going to do advertising and a bit of product sampling. You're going to do sampling with whom, where, and what's the expected outcome, and for what purpose are you doing it? Yeah, so because we're not in an advertising subject, I'm not asking you to come up with the ad. Yeah, but as part of the marketing planning behind the launch, you have an understanding of the type of media that you'd be wanting to use, what objectives you wanted to come from advertising, and therefore what attributes or benefits you thought were important to communicate to create motivation for consumers and differentiation for your brand relative to the competition, to induce consumption behaviour or encourage product trial. So this is the kind of language that I expect you to be thinking about, rather than just going, well, we're going to advertise it. You know what I mean? You're giving me a lot more detail as to why you're doing that. Makes sense? Does that make sense to you guys? Yep. Any other questions before we move on to this part? No? Okay. Okay, so launch management. This is chapter 19. So just as managerial control is required over the product development process, we also need control over the marketing of the new product. And the launch management system can be viewed as a series of steps. The first step is really to spot potential problems that might exist. The second step is to select those that we might want to use as a control. Then we want to develop some contingency plans for the management of those problems should they arise. And then we want to design a tracking system, okay, that allows us to track these things over time, which also gives us a mechanism through which we can react expediently should something happen, but it also builds for us a repertoire of potential problems in new product development that we can come back and refer to later as we move through the MPD process. So a lot of organisations throughout the world have centres for new product development, where predominantly the entire emphasis of MPD is managed by a department or a team. And some of you, having spent time in managing brands, might find that you migrate into specialised teams. And one of those specialised teams is likely to be a new product development team. And they will then put in place, or they will have running within them, formal procedures very much like what we're operating within. Okay? So the textbook is geared around the management of new product development from a commercial level, not an entrepreneurial level. Okay? It's the way. Our assumption is that you're not going to be all entrepreneurs. A large number of you are going to end up in organisations like IBM, Google, Nestle, Unilever, Reckitt Benckiser, Sony. You're going to end up in one of these large multinational organisations in some marketing capacity where new product development is very much part of the company's broader strategy, and therefore based on that premise, that's why we take this particular focus that is a more regimented, step-based process for the new product development process. But this is all about creating a launch management system. So the idea being that this was our plan, and the idea being here that if we didn't have a contingency plan, and this was our actual, we'd sort of end up over here. But by having some kind of contingency plan, if percent aware, the percent are aware are not trial, so we don't have trial. So we've got people that have awareness but not trial. So we're wanting to capture them. What would we do? What's our contingency plan? How do we actually get ourselves back onto this trajectory? We're doing a good job in generating awareness, but we're not converting that awareness to product trial. Okay. And for those of you who are in this morning's lecture relating to brand management, this is where the funnel technique that the guest speaker was talking about comes into play. So it's the transition from awareness to trial, and she went on to list a whole different number of steps and motivations that could be measured that got to the final step, which in their case was loyalty. But for the purposes of what you need to understand for this subject, it is putting in place an action plan, and this could be any number of issues that make sure that we have some kind of contingency, that if we are deviating from our plan, we have something to actually bring us back closer to our overall goal. So step one is spotting potential problems, and the first technique is looking at the problems that was prepared previously during the situational analysis that you would have looked at. Technique two is to role play what competitors will do after they've heard of your new product. And this is based on the premise, I often say this to a lot of students to give context of where NPD sits within the broader strategic management process. You think about the idea that marketing strategy has 4 guiding principles, the first of which is all customers are different, which we looked at in last week's lecture. All customers change, meaning the external environment and the internal environment give rise to areas of opportunity, and segments change over time. They can change for a whole host of different reasons. The third is that competitors react, and this is in response to competitive reaction. We know that if we bring a product out into the marketplace, competitors are going to react. It's inevitable because the market is very fluid. And the fourth is really that all resources are limited, which means even in the context of new product development, we need to be careful about how many products we bring into the marketplace because we might not have the finances to be able to do all of them all at once. Okay? So we want to make sure that the ones we are doing are likely to have success. The third technique for spotting potential problems is to look back over all the accumulated data in the new product file, and firms gather this information over time in order to be able to identify potholes that might lead to future problems. And the second is to consider the hierarchy of effects needed to result in a satisfied customer, which is reflected in the ATAR model. Okay? So they are the 4 potential techniques that can be used. So here we might have a large number who are aware, a number who are unaware. Of those that are aware, some will have tried it. There's a group that have not tried it. Of those who have tried it, only half have reused it and the other half won't reuse it. Okay? So there's a few issues here. One, is there a capacity to convert those that are aware to being trialists? And then we have a problem that of roughly 50% of those who try it are not rebuying it. Okay? So that, in essence, is not a graph that you really want to see. Ideally, you will have picked this up long before as a problem, right? This is suggesting that there is a product performance issue. The product is not performing. It doesn't taste to its expectations. It doesn't clean to consumers' expectations. It doesn't deliver quality sound to customers' expectations, etc. Step 2 is to select the control events. So of all potential problems, which have enough impact to warrant investigation, which of these ought to be given special consideration. And here, those that might consider potential damage and likelihood of occurrence, so in this instance, which of these should be given contingency planning, and which of these need to be tracked. Okay? So here, if we have a look at this model, what are the full set of possible negative events? Those negative events with enough impact to warrant investigation, those negative events that are so weighted with probability and damage that they must be given special consideration, which can then be split into those that cannot be contingency planned in any way different from the way they have already been planned, and those that will be given a contingency plan. And on those that will be given a contingency plan, those that will not be tracked versus those that will be tracked. Okay. So here is an expected effects matrix for the selected control events, likelihood of occurrence, potential damage. So occurrence low, moderate, high, potential damage noticeable, harmful, devastating. You can see here how it creates those that we need to watch versus those that need some kind of contingency plan and tracking. So step 3 is actually developing those contingency plans. So having identified the problems, what are the contingency plans that we're going to put in place? So the first question we need to ask is there anything we can actually do? So what happens, for example, if a competitor cuts its price or launches an imitation product? What can we do? What would you do? What would you do? What would you do? Competitor comes out, launches a imitation product that dilutes your point of difference in the marketplace, or they drop their price dramatically. What are you going to do? Scare campaign. Yeah. Send out a whole bunch of blokes with baseball bats to chop the knees off their marketing personnel. Okay, you could most certainly use advertising as a mechanism to reinforce your differentiation relative to the competition, which does not necessarily always need to be rational. It could be emotional. Could be. The other point is it could be imagined, not real. Okay. So it could be based on user imagery, is imagined, not necessarily real. It might well be that we launched our product with a penetration pricing strategy. We may have been wanting to launch with a skimming strategy, but we now think that's a little bit dangerous to do, so we can redirect our price and change our pricing strategy as a mechanism to negate the effect that the competitor is trying to have. Okay? So these are the things that you might want to think through. So it could be that there's a company failure, for example, inadequate distribution. It could be a consumer failure, low awareness level, low trial. And good contingency thinking is much better than reacting to crises under panic conditions. This is why a lot of firms have PR things in place as well, right? So the same principle for crisis management in PR for managing brands in general also has an implication for the way we think about contingency planning. If we have a contingency plan for those events that could occur, they don't come as a surprise to us. We know how to react. That's in essence the principle. Then we need to design a tracking system. So we now have a set of negative outcomes, for most of which we have a contingency plan that is ready to go. So the next step is developing a system that will tell us when to implement any of those contingency plans. The answer lies in what we refer to as the concept of tracking. So questions from a new product tracking study, which can be used for these purposes, is contained in figure 19.6 in your text. You can ask questions relating to category usage questions. So these are questions asked of consumers, so you're doing ongoing tracking. You can ask some questions like, in the past 6 months, how many times have you bought the product? What brands have you bought within the product category? Or have you heard of in the product category? Have you heard of, and you might ask 4 to 6 different brands that exist. So this is all getting at what? What are we getting at here? What brands of ice cream have you ever heard of? What are we getting at? What is this effectively telling us? Yeah, okay. It's not really what we're getting at, but yes, I could see how that could be the case. Yes, not quite what I'm looking for, but close. Yeah, so you're getting here in this question, to what extent do you have unaided brand recall? Okay, so you haven't told them of your brand, you're just asking them for recognition. So it's unaided brand recall. Have you heard, so in the event that they say they don't mention your brand here, this is aided recall. So have you ever heard of Magnum? Have you ever bought Magnum? About how many times have you bought Magnum in the past 6 months? So this is all about consumption behaviour. So the first part here is designed to tell us whether we have issues in awareness. If this question leads us to an awareness level that is really low, what might we do as a contingency plan? What do we do? Got low awareness. Bump up our advertising. Revisit our media plan. It might well be that people are not, in our target audience, are not being exposed to our message because we're using the wrong media. It might well be that they're not getting enough exposure to it to be able to make the recall. They might have high level of awareness, but they haven't purchased it. So we need to think about what are the barriers that might be stopping those that are aware moving into product trial. Okay. And it might well be that we haven't really, in our advertising message, been able to really clearly articulate what our competitive advantage is. We might come back and redress our message. And this is about specific advertising. It's getting more into the specifics of whether the advertising itself can be recalled. Where did you see it? This is about, are they choosing the right media? Or is one media more effective than another? Have you ever bought brand? If yes, how many times have you bought it? How likely are you to buy it again? What did you like or dislike about the brand? What do you think the price of the brand should be? If you haven't bought it, did you look for that particular brand in store? Why didn't you try it? How likely are you to try the brand in the future, etc., etc. Okay. So we've got to replace the word brand with Magnum, and you'll get a sense about what we're actually trying to get at in the context of having these tracking studies. And the tracking studies are done usually every 6 months in order to see whether there are shifts. Some firms only do them once every 12 months, but you might start with a new product, doing it every 6 months in order to make sure that you are on top of understanding where the problems might be lying. So how do you get people that might be buying, might have strong levels of awareness? You need awareness before you can have trial. It could be that they're not trialing it because you've got really weak distribution. It's another reason that could be problematic. Then people may move into trial a product, but are they coming back to buy it again? So what's the level of repeat? So you're really trying to get, and then how many have really bought it strongly into their evoke set versus those who haven't bought the product strongly into their evoke set. So those who have are leading you down towards stronger levels of loyalty. So there might be different strategies that you deliberately deploy in order to create greater loyalty. But the idea being is you need to identify and isolate where exactly in the flow of purchase consumption the problem is really lying. Okay? Because it might well be that you've got really high level of awareness, so the issue isn't in awareness. The issue is actually in the conversion of awareness to trial. That would indicate to me that is either a distribution issue or it's an advertising content issue. Okay. Select designing the tracking system. Here you need to select the tracking variables, which is a tough part of launch management. They need to be relevant. Relevant to the problem. They need to be measurable. So is the data available? How do you do that? And they need to be predictable. You need to select the trigger points, so how bad it has to be before you act on the contingency plan. And you need to consider the non-trackable problems as well. in which case you might interview salespeople, customers to find out why sales might be falling. So you'll tend to find that most of the issues that relate to tracking relevant, measurable and predictable elements as part of your tracking survey will relate to those key stages of, building brand awareness, converting awareness to trial, converting trial to repeat, and then looking at the amount of volume per repeat. And you're going to have different strategies at different levels as to what you will do given those particular issues. Okay? And you need to be thinking about not only what's happening within the internal context of the organisation, but the external environment as well, because what are the competitors doing in order to create an issue for your brand? Internally, it might be that you're not spending enough money, or that your advertising message is wrong, or your sales force has been ineffective in getting you distribution. Externally, your competitor might be repositioning your product in the marketplace. It might have a stronger strategic competitive advantage. It might have a lower pricing structure. It might have stronger distribution. You need to work out where are those key issues and what are you going to put in place in order to mitigate their impact on your new product launch. So an example of a launch management plan, potential problem, customers are not making trial purchases of the product. So we might begin a series of 10 follow-up calls a week to prospects. And we might say that there must be sorry, I teach for 7 hours today. My throat gets croaky. So there must be 25% agreement on product's main feature and trial orders from 30% of those prospects that agree on the feature. So this is in effect what might be the trigger event. And in this, when this is triggered, the contingency plan might be that you have a special follow-up phone call to prospects by sales reps offering a 50% discount on all first-time purchases. Okay? Now we could go through and list many different types of contingency plans that we might have in place in order to address a whole series of different issues that might raise their head throughout the launch process. Launch management and knowledge creation. So really it's designed to capture the events leading up to product launch in order to understand the thinking that has taken place behind them. The goal is to identify effectively what went wrong so it can be duplicated, so it can be addressed into the future. So it's keeping a tracking system of what happened, because sometimes the same potholes arise every time you go to the market with a new product in order to avoid it into the future. And the after-action review includes statements of planned objectives and actual results, along with what has been learned and outlines for any future next steps. So this here gives us an example of an after-action review. My experience of these is they're slightly different, but the objective is the same, or the principle is the same. So the objectives in this instance were to send customer samples by end December, send revised samples by end February, reduce the test time in half from 60 to 30 seconds. The results, objective 1 was missed by 1 week and the other objectives were achieved, so they failed to send customer samples by end December. Why? Because the new product did not achieve performance requirements spelled out in the product specification. There was too much time, in fact 6 weeks lost in redesigning and remanufacturing as a result. So there was not enough time allocated for hardware or software changes, but the team was able to reduce test time due to newly developed efficient testing. So the lessons learned were we relied too much on off-the-shelf processes, and testing procedure turned out to be more complex than expected, which should have been accounted for in the plan. So really this just sets as a template for any future initiatives that they might well do into the future. So the next question, which is the tragic question, how do you manage a failure? Okay, this is very terrible to have to deal with, but it does happen. I told you my lifesaver story. It happened over 20 years ago and it still haunts me. Okay, you need to start to think about, well, in the event that the product isn't selling, it sort of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy when a product starts to fail. It doesn't matter what you're doing, you keep throwing money at it, it's not working, you're not getting trade support. You're not getting return on investment. You start to get deletions from retailers. So you start going from level 1 distribution, level 2 distribution. You can see the writing on the wall. Your sales team are out there trying to keep it. They come back to marketing, say, can we invest some more money in it? Can we have some more trade investment? And eventually you get to the stage where you go, you know what? It's just not worth investing in anymore. It's dead. You come to the realization that it is time to abandon. So in this context, this sort of takes us through a number of scenarios, or the process of deletion. So a recognition of the product to be deleted, so we compare performance against the criteria that signal the beginning of the deletion process. And often this is based on market share, growth rate, profit margin. And often it's often largely related to market share. This is why market share is so important, because the more market share you have, the more resources that you are generating to spend. So common market share, growth rate, profit margin. You analysis and revitalisation stage, so can the product viably be restored? You're asking of yourself, can we make quality improvements? Can we open up new markets? Could we do new line extensions? Could we increase the price? Could we reduce the price? You know, what could possibly be done to keep this puppy alive? Then we evaluation and decision formulation stage. We consider the effects of the deletion on overheads, the firm's full loan policy, and capacity utilisation. So this is a real problem. So you may have, to launch your new product, which was the case that I did with my lifesavers, we actually went and bought a complete new line. We bought a complete new line that we didn't really need. Okay, new packaging equipment, new plant equipment. We'd employed more staff. We had a hell of a lot of packaging on hold. So there were a number of complicated issues here. And then the implementation stage. So at this point, we ask ourselves, do we want to delete the product immediately? Can we milk it for its profits and let it die its own race? Do we sell it? Do we clear it through a particular distribution channel that we're not operating in? So there's some of the key questions that we will ask. So that completes that lecture. Next week, just need to revisit what we're looking at next week. So your exam has been written and has been submitted. I did want the exam in the first week of the timetable, which I requested the first week, we didn't get it, which was unfortunate, largely because of the size of the cohort. I was hoping to get it done earlier. Next week we'll talk about public policy issues, and then in week 13 we will talk about, we'll do a complete revision, and we will talk about the exam. Okay? And as part of that, I will likely give you further questions, and I'll certainly give you a pretty good structure, or I'll give you a good understanding of the structure of the exam. It's focused on all the material. However, it is heavily biased towards the second half. So if you did well in your mid-semester, then you probably only need to focus on the second half. Make sense? Yeah, so there is, basically I'm testing the whole course. There is no doubt that I'm not testing the whole course, but it is slightly biased towards the back end. I couldn't tell you exactly what that percentage is, but that's effectively how it's going to operate. I'll talk more about the exam, but the exam will effectively be made up of multiple choice and short answer or extended answer questions, not short answer questions, but extended answer questions. The extended answer questions will relate to a case study. So you'll be given a fictitious case study relating to the development of a new product, and you will provide advice, effectively. Yep.
How much detail do you need from sometimes it goes quite compared to the lecture.
Yeah. There are some elements within the context, like I did in the last exam. The depth will be related to the multiple choice questions. So the broader concepts you'll be able to get from obviously the lecture notes and the general stuff that you would read within the context of the text. There are... Yes. In some of the multiple choice questions. Yeah. So I always have a little bit of the detail. The idea is that I'm meant to be presenting the broader concepts. You are meant to be doing additional reading to give yourself dimension and understanding of the concepts. And really to try and draw out the HD students, there are always going to be a couple of questions that are more difficult than others that are really there to test the, to identify those HD students, basically. Okay. So that's pretty much where we sit. But it's a nice exam. I enjoyed writing it. So yeah, so that's pretty much how it will unfold. So yeah, so next week, public policy issues. I can tell you that the public policy issues will not be part of the exam, so you don't have to learn that chapter. So there's one advantage you've got. So we'll introduce some of those public policy issues. But the last week, I'll give you a nice overview, give you a clear understanding of the types of things that you can expect in the context of the exam. Obviously I gave you a practice exam so you could give yourself, it's my way of giving you feedback, or it's giving yourself self-feedback on your performance. I'll do the same with the final exam. So that you can give yourself some self-performance. Then as part of your group project, we'll obviously give you a large amount of feedback. I've purposely picked my tutors to make sure that they do give feedback, because I think feedback is very important. The thing with every student gets feedback, you have to know how to find your feedback, okay? Feedback lives in Turnitin, so all the feedback is poured into Turnitin. So if you are not accessing your entry through Turnitin, it is very easy for you to believe that you didn't get any feedback, okay? But I promise you it's all going to be in there. It's actually, if you go in through Turnitin and Turnitin opens up, you'll be able to see the icons where the tutors have left And there's normally two places that they can leave. There's a commentary page, so they can write. You have to click on an icon, and there'll be some people write there. That tends to be my style. I write down, although I don't mark any of your stuff, but that's where I would typically mark. Some people put comments inside the text, so you'll see those come up as little bubbles. Okay? So there will definitely be stuff there. If you can't see commentary, it's not because it's not there, it's because you just haven't been able to find it. Okay, see you all next week. Good luck in the final push to get your... I'm looking forward to reading to you. Some of them sound really good, so keep pushing ahead.
One more question about the
Yeah.
I have a question for our products. Our products is for Neutrogena. We want to expand a male sunscreen. And we already have the positioning in the phase 5. There will be some overlap contents mentioned in the image, the brand image. So we don't know what should be included in the positioning.
The positioning is either going to be a positioning that is consistent with your existing brand, or it's going to be, it depends on the brand architecture that you use. So if you use a house of brand strategy and you come up with your own brand, and then it's just really the company name is nothing more than a secondary endorser, then you'll have to create your own positioning. If you are using a sub-brand, then you need to reiterate what is the positioning of the brand that you are operating under.
But we find the slides says about some features or benefit functions. That is talking about the products. So we don't know what the connection between the products and also the positioning of the brand.
So the positioning of the brand is the core promise the brand is making to consumers.
Yeah.
So the core promise either comes out of an attribute or it comes out of a benefit, and a benefit could be rational, emotional, or symbolic.
So it's very broad things.
It's the core promise the brand is making to consumers.
Is it fine if we make it a graph to show emotional benefit, like the symbolic benefit, to show the overall picture of that brand positioning?
No, because that's using perceptual mapping, which doesn't really work unless it's a functional product. So if you're using perceptual mapping, you need on your axes functional attributes, safety, performance. You map. In that instance, a functional example based on an attribute might be that it's positioned as a low-carb beer. Something positioned on a functional benefit might be that it protects the family from germs. Something that's built on a symbolic benefit might be positioned around a non-product attribute, so it could be something around Russian authenticity, or Italian authenticity. It could be something like, the other examples that I gave you around Johnny Walker. Making personal progress. So the idea is you need to identify what is that position of your brand, and you use the brand mantra tool that is in the slides to come up with what you think is the core promise the brand's making to consumers.
Did we say how consumer perceive our brand?
Well, you'll definitely be talking about what the benefit of your brand is, the key benefit of your brand is, right?
Yeah.
So whether that is superior efficacy, whether that is family protection, whether that is creating a sense of belonging, whatever it happens to be, right? So you'll definitely be talking about that within the context of your brand's positioning, really. So that's what I talk about it.
Another question. We have for the phase 3, we provided the rationale why we delete one product and just remain 2 products.
Yep.
And then we also, should we give the rationale for why we keep 2 products?
No, really, the focus should be, well, phase 3 for me is doing 2 things. One is reporting on your research, so what was found in your research. The second part is reporting on your full screen, so not sort of which elements of which product was the strongest in the full screen, and what are the areas that perhaps were forcing the other one to be more, so stronger in technical accomplishment, and the other one was weaker in commercial accomplishment, and that was the distinguishing difference between A and B. And the key issues within those frameworks were issues 1, 2, and 3. Then in phase 4, you're asked to choose between one of the concepts, and it's at that point that you would sort of bring that summary all together, and you would make a decisive judgment on which you're going to move forward with.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Because we have asked our tutor about this question, like they say that maybe we should leave the high-level explanation for leaving 2 concepts in 3. So we're concerned about that. Maybe we have some overlap between phase 2 and phase 3. Because if we follow that, we need to explain leaving 2 concepts twice.
Yeah. So that's not my expectation.
Okay.
Because ultimately what I'm asking you to do is to justify why you have chosen one concept over the other. So at the first stage, you're justifying why you left one concept behind, which might include, which is what your tutor is saying, might include why you decided to take the other 2 forward. In the last phase, you are really deciding on which one you've left behind, which could equally be about, therefore, the strengths of the other ones were just too dominant and too powerful to leave behind. It might well be that you are relying on consumer research, or you're relying on the full screen, or the issues in the full screen, despite the fact that the full screen was favouring one concept over another, you believe that the issues will be overcome, or are not going to be impediment to the brand's future success.
Also, should we give any reasons for why we choose these criteria into the full screen?
No, they should be self-evident. So you should be able to say that you should be able to the elements that you've taken into the full screen should be evident as the person that's marking it reads through. It makes logical sense to them. The problem is that there are things in the textbook, for example, that relate to the full screen that even I don't understand.
Yeah.
The author doesn't give any real context to them. So what ends up happening is that students, the reason why I get you to do this is that otherwise the full screen it's a non-event, because all they do is copy straight out of the textbook. They're actually thinking, why am I actually doing the full screen? What's the real purpose of doing the full screen? Because the technical and commercial accomplishment might be different for different products or services. And some issues may be completely irrelevant that he's got listed in there. And some, like in my instance, I read some of them. There's not many, but a couple I looked at and I go, I actually don't even understand what you're talking about. Or she, don't even know them.
So as long as the scoring model is made by our discussion and have old thinking, so that is, no need to detail.
It's like 6 pages.
Yeah.
Sorry, you don't know what's going on. So my advice is to anything that is too long, just put it in the appendix. So if you're overcoming your word count, is that your problem? That you're over your word count? Yeah. So just put it in the appendix, giving you that leeway.
Putting everything in appendix also raise kind of concern. Like if we putting too many words in our report, tutor feels like we are not clearly about what we want to mainly talk about. So we just putting so many words talking about that.
Yeah, I think the way to think about the report, there's 2 things to think about the report. The first is the report is intended to be practical in its orientation. It is not intended to be giving your tutor a lecture on the new product development process. And so it's not, and I also teach this in semester 1 to postgraduates, this subject, and some of them make the problem, they don't write it as a report. They'll write it almost like an essay, and you'll go, they'll have diagrams in there that are straight out of the textbook, and you'll go, what is that doing there? Why is it there? So it needs to be written as a report, as though you're going to give it, as though you're working for a Nestle or whatever company it is that you're working for, doing your branding on, and you're going to give that to your boss. The boss doesn't want to lecture on what is a full screen and what's the purpose of the full screen.
So can we use like we decided like use like we and
Well, I personally don't like writing it in the first person. I tend to write a report in the third person. So I'd say, you know, the evidence from the research suggests that blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Having completed the full screen analysis, the key issues that have arisen in the you know, concept A is, you know, being superior to concept B. The key drivers of that are really reside in the technical accomplishment stage, and the real barriers in that phase to concept A happen to be issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. Moving on to the research results, you know, and she was like this. So it's actually almost like presenting the feedback, and then you're analysing the results from the data, and then you're so you're writing a report at the end of the day, not an essay. It doesn't matter if you come up with, you know, the full screen was done as a mechanism to evaluate the technical and commercial feasibility of the project. That's fine. It's just an introductory statement. But I'm talking about people putting full diagrams that have crap in them that is not even related to their project. I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but they'll put in like a big diagram, something you expect from a first year student. No, just don't do that.
Sure. And no need to like in detail talk about what actually their written textbook should be.
It's practical.
So just the main point is what actually our project is.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
I just have a quick question about the video. So for that, do we need to include a summary into the report, or are we not expected to mention it within?
No, so the video is for the purpose of your presentation.
Yeah, so it's not.
It's not part of your report.
Yeah,
yeah,
that's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I think the real issue is that those elements of your video that are important will be in your report in terms of your concept board, etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, just have a few questions.
Yeah, sure.
When it has the section in the launch management where you talk about who you're targeting and who you're segmenting, how do you differentiate between those two? Or they kind of, because we kind of talked about, like we went into a persona and said like which demographics will be targeting and psychographics.
Yeah.
Is that kind of covered?
So if you wanted to do it really well, then you would typically look at, you'd probably identify 4 segments of the category. So, which means you come up with 4 personas. And you identify which, see, persona is just another name for a segment. I don't like the word persona because it's a target audience description, but the word persona leads you to a name, like Mary. Okay? We wouldn't call a segment Mary, you would call it the environmentalists, or you would call it the naturalists, or the upwardly mobile, or the romantics, or the adventure seekers. Or it wouldn't be called, oh, that's John and that's Joe and that's Mary as a segment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So in an ideal way, you'd use a psychographics. It depends on which brand you're looking at, but probably psychographic or benefit segmentation, or a combination of both, multivariate segmentation, and really maybe build 3 segments. And then say, okay, well, within the context of this is the way the market could be segmented, the segment that we are targeting with our particular product is going to be segment A. And our positioning is going to be blah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
So that's the way you technically it should be done. So sometimes, and I start with a segment name, so I just sit down and go, okay, well, what am I doing? I might be doing this, so I'm doing footwear, I'm doing Nike. I'd sit down and I'd go, okay, well, there's the professional athlete, there's the after-hours athlete, there are so they need to be mutually exclusive, so then I need to think of another one, and then I might come up with there might be another one that's the fashionistas that wear sand shoes just because of their fashion credentials. I'd go through and build those three up. I'd bring number one, I'm talking psychographics, these people like winning, there's no prize for second place. It's all about the encased trophy and goals, they train, they need attributes they're looking for, attributes such as comfort and support, superior technology. Second group over here, after hours athletes, these are the people that go out after dark, they're participants in sport, but it's softer sports, And over here, there's this group. This group is, basically they're fashionistas, so these people are all driven by design, so it's a symbol of their success. I don't know how you make it up, but the idea being, and sometimes you might find the start of the segmentation analysis online. You could look online, you could look in an IRIS report, you might find that there's one that already exists. And, just tailor that to make it your own. Make 3 or 4 segments out of it. If they've done the heavy lifting for you, then you just take those ideas and make them up. But that's really where I start. Like that one idea with the romance, I think, okay, well, travel, international travel, where do we start? Well, some people travel for adventure. Some people travel for romance. Some people travel for cultural enrichment. Some people travel for exploration, explore things that are new. I could already, and then some people just like to they just want to get away from the city. They want to disconnect from the world, so they might be the disconnectors. And from that, from having built in all those segments, I could really, the disconnectors want to leave the office at home, get away. They want to sit on the beach and read a book. The explorers want to go to untracked ground and search for interesting things, so they might want to climb Mount Everest or do something. They'll be doing something that's a bit different, going to the Incas or then the cultural enrichment crew, or the crew that are going to be wanting to, they'll see themselves a little bit more to them. They'll be wanting to go and stay in places that have lots of museums and ruins that they can get involved with. The romantics want to get away and find love, or rekindle love. The types of places they stay in where they find their information is going to be different. And then the adventure travellers, they just adrenaline junkies. They just want to go away. So you can then start to see, well, adrenaline, they're really the people going to New Zealand. The romantics, probably going to France. The cultural enrichment, probably going to Greece, maybe Turkey, Italy. The getaways are going to be going to places like Bali. So, and then you might go, we are going to be chasing this particular target audience, and our promise to this particular group is going to be this.
Thank you.
Makes sense?
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of, I was having a bit of trouble with pricing because ours is an app.
Right.
So it's like a networking upskilling app. And so it would be $490 or $450 a month, but but you would lock in into a year contract. So it'd be like $50 a year. So in terms of the ATAR model, since they're locked into it, is your repeat purchase just one?
Yes, I just take the yearly figure and make it one. Yeah.
And in terms of, they would also have, because we actually would like to.
Sorry, there is another way you could look at that, and that is, would they buy another family member one? which is the potential for repeat. You just need to think about, I don't actually understand your product, but that could be the repeat purchase.
Yeah, true. Okay.
So you might say, well, 20% will repeat or buy one additional product for another family member.
And then in terms of, we wanted to make it like free on download, but it doesn't have many features, and then you can like buy the premium version, which you would choose. Would you
So
have to
one's more-
factor that in to the ATAR?
In that instance, well, be thinking in that context about converting. So that would be conversion of those that are taking up the sampling opportunity. So,
So would that go into the calculation?
well, you need to work out. So who's your buying unit going to be?
We calculated it was like university placed students, and then from our survey we found like 67% of those are socially anxious, so we took that. It was like 1.3 million.
Yeah, well, if you did it the other way, you'd have to make some kind of, because you're maybe the ones, I need to think about it, you might want to talk to your tutor about it, but maybe the awareness level is actually those who trial the product. Slightly. You need to make some kind of allocation about some kind of allocation for what percentage of those that pick it up are going to upgrade to the premium version, the paid version.
Yeah.
You need to account for that somewhere if you're going to take that strategy.
Because in our survey, like when we asked, would you purchase a premium, like they all said yes, but we just make that assumption. And then for the ATAR model, just do it like on the premium version because.
Yeah, it might be easier so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot down the track.
Okay.
Yeah, and maybe it's you could do it the other way because of the percentage who try the product, who take up the offer, what percent actually, what percent, so built into that trial figure would be those that take up the offer and convert to the full package. There's two ways, so just think about which way you want to do it.
And if you would have a premium version of the product, is that premium pricing?
Only if the short answer to that question is no, not necessarily, because it might well be that relative to the competition, the price is low. Doesn't necessarily mean that it is premium pricing. It might well be that it's new to the market and its pricing structure is in fact a skimming price because you've made it more expensive. As other apps come in and do the same thing, you might have to reduce your price over time. Or it might well be that you go in with a low price in order to get market penetration. So no, you can't be that blunt.
Yeah. And if it is new to the market, because for us it is, because it's like using AI and stuff, how would you judge whether it's a high price or not? Because there wouldn't be that competition.
Well, you'd look at substitute products. Are there any substitute products in the marketplace?
Kind of like you can do like online video interview practice.
Yeah, maybe you look at that relative to, so are there other substitute products? Look at the pricing structure of substitute.
Awesome. And then just super quick, with the strategic givens and like when you talk about the pick, your guidelines and stuff, do you have to justify them or can we just like
Could put a sentence on the end of someone, investment in promotion and advertising should achieve at least 85% awareness because awareness is a precursor to, because, awareness is an important precursor to product trial. I wanted to just tie off in case your tutor wants to see that you're making a link, so they're not just there for the sake of being there, that they're there for a reason.
And for the full scoring model, so our tutor said to keep it in the report, but it does take a bit of work out. I was just wondering your opinion.
To keep it in the report?
Yeah, or put it in the appendix, because we were told the appendix won't really be marked. Not sure.
Well, basically at the end of the day, I would, if you're short on word count, I would put it in the appendix because you're reporting on it in the part 3. So part 3, you'll give a debrief on the research, and you'll also give a debrief on the full screen analysis.
So we'd want to write paragraphs for the questionnaire and the full screen.
Yeah, and then in your backup, if you're saying in the concept 1 had its top boxes were X, Y, Z. Its intention, its capacity to solve the problem was A, B, C. And then if they want to look into more detail, they turn to the back. They go to your appendix to see more detail. And same with the full screen. So in the full screen analysis, you might say, well, the full screen analysis is an indicative tool to look at being used as an indicative tool to evaluate the technical and commercial feasibility between the two products. The results of the full screen analysis are demonstrating that concept A has a higher score against the two key frameworks at the concept B. The key drivers of this distinction are that concept A had a much lower score in technical feasibility, mainly driven by these issues, issue 1, issue 2, issue 3. So you see how you're sort of, and then if they want detail, they go back and they find your full screen.
And do we go into that again when we, in the next stage?
So you do that in stage 3 and stage, that's what stage 3 is all about.
Mm-hmm.
And then in stage 4, the opening to stage 4 is to say, okay, well, having analysed that information, this is the concept that we're going with, and this is the rationale as to why we are going with concept A or concept B, for example.
Would the rationale be quite similar though?
It's similar, but it could be a restatement. So it might well be that, for example, despite the fact that the full screen analysis was XYZ, we've addressed some of the key issues in our marketing plan to address the commercial feasibility, and therefore based on that premise. So it's a lot more, the reports hanging together.
Yeah. Great. And when it's at a very, like, with the HD part where it's at a very good sample size, is that just meeting the 30?
Yeah.
Was that going to, okay. Perfect, thank
No
you.
worries, take care.